Hello, I'm Brenda, and in this video we're going to look at 8 memoirs that I have read this year or intend reading this holiday season, and what I think they can teach us about writing our own memoirs. One of the memoirs I read is Fun Home by Alison Bechdel. This one I read because it is a tragicomic. It's set in a comic-style memoir, and there aren't too many of them around, and so I wanted to see how Alison Bechdel drew her memoir, and from that aspect it is a fascinating memoir. But at the end of the memoir I kind of shut the book and thought, not really for me. I didn't resonate with Alison Bechdel as a writer, and I didn't resonate with her story. And that is perfectly fine. We are not writing our memoir for every reader to love us. We're writing our memoir because we have a story to tell, and our story is not going to resonate with everybody, and that's okay. And I think when we start writing our memoirs, we have to give ourselves permission to recognize that. There are readers who will not resonate with us. They may pick up our book, start to read it, and shut it. And that is fine. It does not mean that you're not a good writer or that your story does not have value. It's just not resonating with that reader. When we embrace that right at the beginning of the writing process, I think it frees us up to actually tell our story, not wondering what the reader's actually going to think or say or judge. So that's my takeaway from Fun Home by Alison Bechdel. A memoir I read that I was really looking forward to reading is Taste by Stanley Tucci. I found I was disappointed in the memoir, and I really didn't appreciate the use of the F word throughout his memoir in so many different ways, including in how to describe the quantity of ingredients for a recipe. The word F, do we need to use this one, and the proliferation of it? So that was a huge disappointment for me. One thing I did glean from it that I'll share with you that I think does impact us as memoir writers is where Stanley Tucci explains about a lesson he learned about acting. And this is what he says. He remembers his acting teacher, George Morrison, telling him that audiences love to watch people eating, drinking, or smoking on stage and scream. Stanley Tucci goes on to say that there is indeed something very compelling about watching someone carry out a very necessary, mundane task. It humanizes them and therefore allows us to connect with them. When I read that, that made me think that's also important for our memoirs. When we look at our lives, we may think that we haven't had a very exciting, enticing life. We haven't sailed around the world, climbed Kilimanjaro, done something fantastic that's going to interest people. We haven't come back from a severe addiction or anything along those lines. We've pretty much had an ordinary life and made some ordinary choices. Who's going to want to read about that? And I think in looking at this quote, it makes me think that that's also okay. People are interested in ordinary people's lives and how our lives have played out in our context with our choices and our decisions. And so share your ordinary life, share the ordinary happenings of your life. Now, another book I said I was going to read in 2022 is The Art of Memoir by Abigail Thomas. And I did, and there are things that I learned from it. But I think what I really want to talk about with regard to this book is that it introduced me to Abigail Thomas. And I went on to read 2 of her memoirs this year. One is A 3-Dog Life, and the other is What Comes Next and How to Like It. I'll talk about that memoir later in this video, but in A 3-Dog Life, what I took away from that one is really the lesson she teaches us. And the lesson of her book is that when we've gone through a really difficult time, tragic circumstances, we can actually rebuild our lives into something we can like and enjoy. And that's a concept she shares in her memoir. And so when we look at our memoirs, what is its concept? What is the lesson we're wanting to share? What do we want to convey to the reader about life and living? And that's the lesson from this memoir. Right, this next memoir is Drinking by Caroline Knapp. I read this memoir because Marion Roach Smith has recommended this memoir as being the perfect memoir. And I thought, well, I do need to then read the perfect memoir. When I shared with my memoir mentoring group that I was starting to read this memoir, one of the participants said, I read it and I didn't like it at all. I found that Caroline Knapp kept saying the same thing over and over and over again. She could have got to the point a lot sooner. I actually stopped reading it. I couldn't take any more of it. And I thought, oh, okay, let me see what my experience is of the memoir. And I would say I have to agree. I also found that Caroline Knapp gave us so many examples of drinking and being drunk and excess and all the things that happened that it was far too much. And when she didn't have enough of her own examples, she gave us examples of her friends who she met in rehab and all their drunken escapades, to the point that I said, I am done. I feel like I'm constantly drinking and drunk. And perhaps that was her intent. But I found that I was 3/4 of the way through the book and we still hadn't got to the turning point, to this resolution, to this aha moment, to this awakening moment. And I thought, all right, this is far too much. I cannot keep reading this memoir. And the lesson for me from this is to follow the advice of Virginia Woolf, who says that the job of the writer, the task of the writer, is to take one incident and make it stand for 20. I think very much that less is more. The readers are intelligent. You can give them a few examples and they understand the situation. You don't have to keep throwing example after example after example at them. So be selective with your scenes that illustrate your point. Inheritance by Dani Shapiro. This isn't a spiritual memoir, but in some ways I think it is. Because when Dani Shapiro finds out in her 50s that her father is not her biological father, she goes on a quest to find out who she is. And in her memoir, she highlights the 3 spiritual questions she really needs to answer. Who am I? Why am I here? How do I live? And for her, even after who am I, it's a case of how did I get here? Because what she thought about her origin is not the truth. There has been a secret in her family that she was not aware of. And once she's explored this origin of where she comes from, because her father is not her biological father, it really impacts for her too now, how is she going to live? And I think one of the things I drew out of this memoir is that when we write our memoirs, we do look back at the past. We do look at who am I? Where did I come from? How did I get here? But honestly, part of exploring our memoir and our stories is looking to the future. Once I've explored all of this and come to some peace with it, some resolution, or even some celebration, depending on what we're writing and why, we then look to the future of how am I going to live out the rest of my life? And if you don't think that these are questions we've been asking ourselves forever, then the other memoir I've actually bought for myself to read is the memoir Confessions by Augustine of Hippo. This is actually the very first recorded memoir that we have. It was completed in 398. So that is in the 4th century by Augustine, who was the Bishop of Hippo, which is now in modern day Algeria. So written by a North African, he looks into those questions too of who am I? Why am I here? His version of how do I live is this all there is? And he goes on a search to, does God exist? And part of that is because he goes from being the playboy of his life to the priest and the bishop. So this is his story and how he unpacks these things. Okay, 2 more memoirs. One is All Over But the Shouting by Rick Bragg. Apparently, Jerry Jenkins says for him, this is one of the very best books. And the whole reason for it is it breaks all the rules in writing memoir. When I heard that, I immediately said, I don't know Rick Bragg, but I will bet you he's a very accomplished writer. If he's going to break all the rules of memoir, it's because he knows them. He's practiced them, and he's now deliberately upending it, changing it, turning it on its head to do something different. And when I did my research on Rick Bragg, I see he is an accomplished writer. Most of us cannot write a memoir breaking all the rules and pull it off. We need to first know those rules, practice them, apply them in order to write a memoir that will break them and be a good memoir. And I think the lesson for all of us is to learn the rules, to know the rules, to practice them, and then we can test the boundaries and we can bring different elements into our writing as we become more accomplished in our writing. The last memoir I'm going to talk about is the one I touched on earlier by Abigail Thomas, What Comes Next and How to Like It. This is a short form memoir. She writes completely differently from the traditional 3-act memoir that most of us know. And so it's not your common story format. Part of this memoir is what it doesn't say. In fact, Stephen King gives this review on the memoir. He says, Abigail Thomas is the Emily Dickinson of memoirists. And so much of this book's wisdom is between the lines and in the white spaces. So there's as much what she doesn't say as what she does say. It's a different style completely. And so there is no one cookie cutter way to write a memoir. However, the 3-act memoir is, as I say, a winning combination. If you use that method, you can't go wrong. But if you find your memoir isn't fitting into it, there are other ways. So that's what's on offer for this video. I will see you in my next video, which will actually be next year. I'm going to take a break and there isn't going to be a video until January. I will see you then. Have a wonderful holiday season.